Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday, the 3rd of October. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 222 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that Ukraine has fully cleared Russian forces from the key eastern city of Liman, a day after Moscow admitted its troops had pulled out after they were encircled. Liman's recapture by Ukrainian troops is Russia's largest battlefield loss since Ukraine's lightning counter-offensive in the northeastern Kharkiv region in September. The UK Ministry of Defence has described the city of Liman as strategically crucial, owing to its key road crossing over the Seversky Donets River, behind which Russia has been attempting to consolidate its defences. Ukraine's military has said its forces also recaptured the village of Torska near Liman in the Donetsk region. Along with Liman, Ukrainian forces have liberated the small Arkhangelska and Mirolubivka settlements, also in the Kherson region as well, President Zelensky said. The lower house of Russia's parliament, the State Duma, has approved laws on annexing 4 Ukrainian territories into Russia. Russia's constitutional court has also declared the annexation of 4 key Ukrainian territories lawful, rubber-stamping the annexation accords signed by Putin. The EU has summoned Russia's top diplomat in Brussels in protest at the illegal annexation of the 4 Ukrainian territories. Irina Vereshchuk, Ukraine's Minister of Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories, has said that a draft law on criminal liability for forced Russian passporting of Ukrainian citizens has been approved. Ukraine is offering the US full visibility into their list of intended Russian targets in the hopes of receiving a new set of powerful, long-range rocket systems, according to Ukrainian officials. Sweden's Coast Guard has said it can no longer see any leaks from the Nord Stream 1 pipeline in the Baltic Sea. The UK government's ability to investigate the true ownership of properties has come into question after researchers found £700 million of luxury homes previously linked to sanctioned oligarchs were not flagged for asset freezes. And the former CIA director and retired 4-star Army General David Petraeus has warned that the US and its allies would destroy Russia's troops and equipment in Ukraine and sink its Black Sea fleet if Russia uses nuclear weapons. Now, we are lucky enough this evening to be joined by Councillor Dr. Siobhan Tolland. Siobhan is an SNP councillor for Lahey and Dundee and is also a community and political activist and a founding member of the community group Dundee Together. Siobhan, how are you keeping this evening?
Not too bad, thanks. How are you?
Very well indeed. All the better for seeing you. Thank you for joining us this evening on Scotland at 7, Siobhan. Now, our first story is that Liz Truss's government has abandoned its plan to abolish the 45% top rate of income tax in a humiliating U-turn after a growing Conservative revolt over the policy and a turbulent reaction from markets. Announcing the decision in an early morning tweet this morning, Kwasi Kwarteng said, "We get it, and we have listened." The Chancellor said the decision to cut tax for people on incomes of £150,000 or more has become a distraction from our overriding mission to tackle the challenges facing our country. He continued, "As a result, I'm announcing we are not proceeding with the abolition of the 45p tax rate." Kwasi Kwarteng told the Conservative conference this afternoon that it had been a tough day, 9 hours after U-turning on a tax cut for high earners, admitting his economic plans had caused a little turbulence. Commenting, the SNP Shadow Chancellor Alison Thewlis MP said, "The Tory budget has been a disaster. It was inevitable this morally repugnant and hugely expensive policy would have to be reversed, after doing so much damage to people's mortgages, pensions and the UK economy. People in Scotland will not forget that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng wanted to rob the poor to pay the rich, and this U-turn will not distract from the fact they are still planning to impose a new wave of devastating Tory austerity cuts, which will hurt the poorest and threaten the NHS. Following Douglas Ross's speech to the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, the SNP SP Rona Mackay responded by saying, Douglas Ross has some brass neck to lecture a room full of Tories about what Scotland needs when his party haven't come close to winning an election here in almost 70 years. There is one government that is holding Scotland back, one that has tanked the UK economy, prompted an unprecedented intervention from the Bank of England, and imposed a deeply damaging Brexit on Scotland against our will. Last week, Douglas Ross urged the SNP to pass on tax cuts for the rich at the expense of the poorest in our communities. Now he says ditching the plan is the right thing to do. The public simply can't believe a word that comes out of his mouth, and it seems his own side are now losing confidence in him, given the reports of plotting to oust him as Holyrood leader. So, Siobhan, having blown £65 billion of Bank of England money supporting our pensions, will Kwasi Kwarteng keep his job as Chancellor?
God, will Liz Truss keep her job as Prime Minister? I mean, there was a few kind of machinations where and a time where I thought that he would just be sacked immediately, as almost the fall guy, because it's not Kwasi Kwarteng, it's part of that kind of wider structure. But how can you this is the problem, isn't it? It's like we keep thinking about credibility, and how can you kind of run a country credible? How can you run an economy with credibility? But the problem with the Conservatives is that the more right wing they go, the less credible they become, and you saw that immediately by even the markets began to kind of balk at the thought of what they were going to do in terms of those kind of huge, massive tax cuts in favour of our uber rich. Imagine earning 150 grand and getting the biggest tax cut going. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable, and it shook the market almost to the core, didn't it? Whether he keeps his job or not, I mean, who knows? The problem that we have is ever since David Cameron left or resigned, it's 10 degrees further to the right. And each new leader we get, it becomes more and more right wing. This is absolutely, utterly, unbelievably so right wing economics. And I think, as Stuart Hosey said last week on debate night, this is kind of ultra right wing think tank economics, thoroughly experimental. They keep talking about the economy growing, but trickle down economics has been lambasted over a decade ago, in the sense that it will never work. It doesn't work. I saw something quite interesting quite funny but sardonic maybe, on Facebook, and it's like I saw someone who was homeless, so I did what everybody should do, and I went and shoved a tenner in the richest areas, going, in order to help. But and that's the philosophy. It's gone. The problem that we have, of course, is we have no control over this now. I was at a rally on Saturday, and Maggie Chapman said something that's kind of got me thinking. And she said that the Conservatives are addicted to crisis. And this is exactly what we've got now. This seemed to me like a deliberate crisis, the deliberate initiation of a crisis, actually. But it was so anti-Robin Hood, or reverse Robin Hood, that it was, I mean, everybody was agog. And I was out in my constituency Thursday and Friday, and everybody was talking about it. I mean, genuinely, everybody was talking about it. I was speaking to speaking to my kind of estate agent the day, and he was saying, if I could get hold of Liz Truss, I swear I would throttle her. And it was just these random conversations happening. But here's the thing as well. It's like, you're kind of, for political people like us, this is what kind of takes us forward. This is what we talk about. But people are talking about this because it was just so utterly bizarre. I was trying to sell my house, although that's kind of stopped a wee bit now. Had a view in the day. They started talking about it as well. It was just these kind of random conversations now. But it's absolutely ridiculous. And if we cannot build a case for independence at this moment in time, then we never will, because now is the time to start thinking about these issues. And now is the time for us to be very, very clear about what we would do and what we wouldn't be doing. And certainly, there has never been a situation under the Scottish Government where we have been subject to this type of crisis. Even during COVID, there was a calmness, there was a stability, there was an attempt to calm that storm. Every single event, the Scottish Government has met it with stability and calm, and the UK Government and Westminster have met it with more chaos and more right wing economics. And that's your two ideological differences right there.
The two things certainly seem to be going hand in hand. You're absolutely right, Siobhan. Thank you. Now, the Chancellor didn't announce anything new when he addressed the party conference this afternoon. Instead, all we heard was a summary of the economic approach that was already set out by Liz Truss during the summer and by Kwarteng in his catastrophic budget. But today, Kwarteng didn't make it sound any more credible than it ever has done in the past. If the content today was feeble, the delivery was even worse. Kwarteng sounded nervous and he was rushing through it as if he couldn't wait to be off the stage. He didn't even seem to have worked out where the applause lines were meant to come in the speech. The challenge facing Kwarteng today with his speech was to show that he still had authority as Chancellor, and he didn't. If anything, people were saying it's made his plight even worse. So thinking of the way in which Liz Truss communicates and the way in which Kwasi Kwarteng communicated today, why is this new government of Truss and Kwarteng in particular so utterly, utterly dreadful at communication?
I think there's a couple of issues. I think that, being slightly nice, what we had is a situation, and when the kind of leadership debate happened, it was almost the last person standing. There was a product of that internal political civil war that was going on, and that kind of division between loyalty to the Boris Johnsonites or or trying to build something, some kind of alternative. And what we got was the Boris Johnsonites, in a new process. I think the more, I don't want to say sinister, but the more sinister interpretation for that from me is they don't need to communicate. They don't care whether they actually communicate or not, because what you've got is, you've got this like group of people, or Liz Truss elected on a very, very tiny minority vote. She spoke and she developed her policy only to capture that tiny minority of the Conservative membership. And she basically struck more and more to the right. There is no need for her to gain a mandate. There is no need for her to gain collaboration. Westminster have never really worked in a collaborative way in the same way that the Scottish Parliament has. But in this kind of sense, what you've got is, and here's the big rub, they get away with it because we let them get away with it. And this is the problem as well. It's like, why do you need to be a good communicator if you just do what you want anyway, because there's no effective challenge? Now, we can look at the Labour Party conference. They seem to have quite a successful conference. They're very much ahead in the polls, but whether that's sustainable is really open to question. I think not. The minute the Conservatives regain their ground, I think that the Labour Party will begin to slip again. But there is deep discontent. But you look at the history, or the recent history of the Tory party, how Boris Johnson survived crisis, lurching from one disaster after another. He got away with it. They get away with it. We let them get away with it. So, communication skills, do they need it? I remember in 2014, and I was listening to the debate in Independence, and I was relatively new to kind of the debate, and it was just as I was kind of becoming active. And I remember hearing quite a lot of Labour Party politicians in Scotland, and I remember thinking how dreadful they were at debating. And I think it's the same process as well, because they're never used to actually debate, and they were never used to being questioned. They were never used to justifying their ideas. And I think
Yeah,
that's part of the reason why the Labour Party are collapsing in here in Scotland as well. But there is that kind of element, they don't seem to even care about justifying their ideas
no,
these
no,
days.
no. No, absolutely. That's a very good point, Siobhan. Thank you. Now, just briefly, we should give him a little bit of attention for a moment. Where is poor wee Dougie Ross, the colonial parrot, left as a result of the abrupt U-turn last night? Last week, he tweeted, "The UK government has delivered tax cuts to turbocharge our economy. The SNP must match these bold plans and pass on the UK tax cuts to 2.4 million Scottish people." But now, when even reporting Scotland is slating Ross for backing the tax rate cut and urging the Scottish Government to do the same, you know that the U-turn is highly embarrassing. And would you say are Douglas Ross's days as Scottish Tory leader numbered?
I would probably say that he might want his days to be numbered because this, I mean, this can't be much fun for him. Let's face it. I think I've said this before that, don't get me wrong, not a Douglas Ross fan, but if you're kind of sitting as a Scottish Conservative and looking on at this mess and this constant jumping back and forth of position in order to have your loyalty to the Conservative Party, because that's what we've got. Do you remember when that was the reason, wasn't it? That was one of the reasons that Boris Johnson was eventually ousted, because government ministers were going, we couldn't keep up with the stories we were told to tell. We were getting this briefing, and then it was changing 10 minutes later, and then an hour later it was back again. And there feels a bit of that kind of Douglas Ross in terms of Scotland. Like, he has to follow the party line, but it becomes so ridiculous. I mean, it really, it's not. I don't want to be kind of. It's not necessarily an issue of the Scottish Tories as such, or even the Scottish Tory leadership as such. It's managing the chaos of Westminster that seems to be the Scottish Conservatives' problem. I'm not sure a new leader would. I'm not
Mm,
sure a new leader would kind of make any difference in that
very good
respect.
point.
It's quite a
Yep.
difficult process. Remember, once upon a time, he held his, he stood his ground over Boris Johnson, and then that just kind of ebbed away. It's like the Lib Dems, we Brexit, and we student loans. It's just kind of ebbed
Yep.
away. Um, I think it just makes the Scottish Conservatives look more and more ridiculous.
Yes, as a whole. No, thank you, Siobhan. Thank you. Let's move away from Conservative politics now, because a new report from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation in Scotland paints a bleak picture of a nation in crisis mode after the fiercest attack on our standards of living in a lifetime. The report says many families willfully ignored by the UK government fear for the worst as they desperately cut back on spending, and 4 in 5 families with a baby said the cost of living crisis is having a negative impact on their mental health. The report, which includes heartbreaking testimonies from thousands of families struggling to come to terms with the extent of the cost of living crisis, begs questions of why the UK government saw it fit to willfully ignore the reality in its response to the unfolding emergency. Last month, the Foundation criticised the mini budget as one that left those on the lowest incomes out in the cold with no extra help to get them through the winter. Just last week, the UK government made the morally indefensible suggestion that they would not go ahead with the promised uprating of benefits in line with inflation, adding to the terror felt by many about the months to come. It cannot be right that the UK government should seek to fund tax cuts for the wealthiest on the backs of those with the least. The latest Poverty in Scotland report from the Foundation includes a survey by Savanta Comres of 4,196 households, thought to be the biggest of its kind. It found that people are increasingly fearful for the future and cutting back on the basics of survival. The survey results show people's finances are already fragile. A third of all people surveyed said they have either no savings or their savings are less than £250. Single parents were more than twice as likely to have little or no savings. People are desperately cutting back. Going without essentials is endemic. Nearly 2 in 3 have cut back on an essential, while 1 in 4 have cut back on 3 or more essentials. Even the basics are hard to come by, with 3 in 4 households having already cut back on the basics. People feel insecure and fear the worst. More than 1 in 5 people said they felt their household financial situation was very insecure. And the cost of living crisis is having an impact on people's mental health. 3 in 4 families with a child where someone has a disability said it had a negative impact on their mental health. The number was even higher for families with a baby, 4 in 5. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation commissioned the survey due to a lack of official statistics, which the Department of Work and Pensions could not accurately collect, they say due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The foundation also gave people on low incomes the opportunity to describe how increasing costs has affected them directly. So, firstly, Siobhan, the foundation in the report today has made a number of proposals, and the first proposal is that the Scottish Government should maintain current tax levels and use available funds to ease the cost of living for low-income households. In particular, they should provide the foundation says that the Scottish Government should provide a one-off payment of £260 to all Scottish Child Payment recipients and all council tax reduction recipients as soon as possible. Does that sound like a workable plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I trust the Joseph Rowntree's Foundation's analysis, and generally look to them as a kind of strategy for kind of anti-poverty policy. So yes, I think so. Interesting that it goes exactly against what our lovely Douglas Ross had said only last week, and then changed his mind again. But yes, we don't put in a regressive taxation. We keep the taxation because it is fairer. And within Scotland, it is more equally distributed, or it more equally distributes the money. But yeah, the 260 uplift, it would make a difference. It will get you a bit an hour electricity these days, but but no, seriously, it would make a difference in terms of the poorest communities. And I hope that the Scottish Government take it seriously and do consider that. I'm pretty sure that they probably would. I know that the Scottish Child Payment is it's increased twice since even its introduction, to keep up with the rate of inflation. Of course, the other recommendation was that the UK government give an immediate uplift to benefits, but as we
Yes.
know, it's exactly the opposite trajectory. So basically, what you're really looking at is the Joseph Rowntree Foundation is saying absolutely not what the Conservatives are doing.
Yeah.
And that right there is your kind of difference between genuine anti-poverty measures and measures that pretend. There's not even any pretense in the Westminster policy these days. But yeah, so we are talking about, again, two very, very different trajectories. I think if we look at where the Scottish Government sit and where the UK government sit, then we know that the Scottish Government sit much closer to the JFK, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's analysis. I
Yeah.
think that our relationship, or the SNP, or the Scottish Government, or the Scottish Parliament actually, our relationship to the third sector, to these charity sectors, anti-poverty sectors, are much more aligned and much more collegial, and much more collaborative, as a culture in Scotland. And we do need to take organisations like the Joseph Rowntree Foundation seriously. It's
Yes, yes,
harrowing. It's harrowing reading. I'm
it is.
just going to give a wee shout out to the Unite the Community in Dundee, who did their own questionnaire, and they sent out questionnaires to all the users of all the food banks across Dundee and asked 3 simple questions. How are you managing now? How would you manage if the food bank closed? And
Hmm.
how do you think the future is going to be? That made for extremely harrowing reading. There was lots of parents saying they would just skip food, which often happens. My parents did it when I was younger, but it's a common thing in poor families. But the mood was particularly low. There was mention of suicide in some areas. There was sheer desperation in other areas. One of the local food banks in Lochee has saw a fourfold increase in the last year, but that's just a fourfold. But since the Queen's funeral, that has risen by 50% just since
Well,
then. Okay, so there's a massive jump. The one in Charleston has jumped nearly 50% again, and that's just over the last few weeks. The mood of people who are attending are also dropping, and that fits in exactly. The local picture is exactly what the Joseph Rowntree Foundation is saying, that that mental well-being is absolutely dipping. And here's the thing, and this is the problem with the Conservative government. It's not necessarily even just the policies, it is the utter chaos that they've done. There was absolutely no need for the Conservatives to continuously allow us to think it's going to spiral up to where gas and electricity is going to spiral up to 6, 7, 8 grand a year, how high it's going to be. We spent weeks and weeks and weeks worrying about this. And now I was worried about it, and I'm able to kind of cushion the cost for those that have got kids, for those that are extremely on the poorest things, that level of stress and anxiety could have been absolutely avoided. And it feels absolutely cruel for that to have happened, that they took so long. And that also goes for Quarten's mini
Yep.
budget in terms of the
Yep.
kind of spiraling costs of mortgages as well, that there was no need for this, but they did it anyway, and it's caused extreme anxiety across the board to a certainly slightly different type of population, probably one that probably just managing, but still it's causing. No wonder our mental well-being is dropping. That level of anxiety and stress, it is utterly shocking.
Shocking and cruel, as you say, Siobhan. Thank you. Now, just as we came on air, we received a statement from the Scottish Government saying that emergency legislation laid before the Scottish Parliament today seeks to increase protection for tenants from rent rises and eviction action during the cost of living crisis. If approved, the Cost of Living Tenant Protection Scotland Bill will give ministers temporary power to cap rents for private and social tenancies, and that cap is set at 0%, effectively freezing rents from the 6th of September this year until at least March, the 31st of March next year. The
Mhm.
bill includes the further power to maintain or vary the rent cap over 2 further 6-month periods. Enforcement of eviction actions resulting from the cost crisis will be prevented over the same period, except for a number of specified circumstances. Damages for unlawful evictions will be increased to a maximum of 36 months' worth of rent. Now, we'll move on to another story now, however, because the Deputy First Minister John Swinney confirmed in a letter to MSPs that Lady Poole, a senator of the College of Justice of Scotland, has given notice on Friday that she intends to step down from her role as chair of the Scottish COVID-19 Public Inquiry for personal reasons. The Deputy First Minister said, "I'm grateful to Lady Poole for the important work she has undertaken since the establishment of this inquiry, and for her offer to assist with the transition to her successor during a notice period of up to 3 months. I thank Lady Poole for her work and wish her well." He continued, "I've already spoken with the Lord President about arrangements for appointing a new judicial chair for the independent inquiry. The inquiry team has been drawing in key information as part of the important evidence gathering process which precedes inquiry hearings, and that work is continuing. The Scottish COVID-19 inquiry is an independent statutory inquiry established under the Inquiries Act 2005. The terms of reference cover 12 areas of investigation, each covering a strategic element of the handling of the pandemic, to identify lessons to be learned and recommendations as soon as practicable. So, Siobhan, just for you, just how important is it that this inquiry goes ahead as planned?
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Yeah, I think it's. I think we need it. I think as a culture, as a society, we need that. We were promised it, and I think the sooner we get a new lead on a new chair, then the better that will be, because we need to have faith in the process. Now I know it was personal reasons and so forth, but any shift in such an important investigation kind of can slightly kind of be a little bit unnerving, and it was vitally important. And it's important that we learn those lessons. This is not going to be our last pandemic. There's more to come. And if you look, I think it was South Korea who managed really well in the COVID pandemic, but it was because the previous pandemic that they managed it so badly, and there was a bit of a backlash there. So they decided that we're going to learn those lessons, and we're going to not do that again. So they kind of managed to kind of be prepared. Now, I'm not saying the Scottish government handled it badly. I don't think they did. I don't think they did at all. But there are lessons to be learnt, and there's always going to be lessons to be learnt. And we didn't do everything right. Of course, we
Of
didn't. We
course.
couldn't have done. And we were, when we, it's weird when you look back and you think, you look back in the knowledge of what that was, but at the very start, no one knew anything. No one knew anything that was going on. Our preparedness was probably a bit shaky at that point as well. I don't know if you're watching, is it This Is England on Now
Hmm.
TV about Boris
Hmm.
Johnson and his action or inaction during the
Yes.
kind of early days of COVID. That made for quite kind of disturbing watching as well, albeit a dramatic reconstruction. But yes, no, I think that the sooner we get an investigation and the sooner we have that discussion about what we could have done, what we should have done, what we did well, what we didn't do well, how we move that forward and how we start preparing for the next one that's going to happen, then the
Of
better
course.
it will be. Yeah.
Thanks, Siobhan. Now, we'll move on with some international news now, because young people from some of the countries most affected by climate breakdown have warned that they are not victims but are a force to be reckoned with in the run up to the next UN climate conference, this time in Egypt. Led by climate groups across Africa and the Middle East, hundreds of activists from countries that are least responsible for the crisis but are experiencing the worst impacts have gathered in Tunisia to prepare for what they say will be a collective fight for justice for their countries and communities, which they will take to COP27 next month. They are campaigning on issues including adaptation funding and recompense for damage from countries that have been most responsible for global heating. At COP26 in Glasgow, delegates promised to give a total of $350 million to help the worst affected countries adapt to the climate emergency. But promises for funding have been broken in the past, and the issue of adaptation funding, along with demands for loss and damage funding to be paid to vulnerable countries by the US and Europe, is a clash point with the global south. Some of those who attended the camp will travel to Egypt for COP27 in the hope that the conference will this time properly address the needs of the countries least responsible for the climate emergency. So, Siobhan, will young people who are living in the parts of the world which are being impacted most severely by climate change, but are least responsible for that change, will they be able to summon a voice? And do you think, will that voice be listened to?
I hope so. I really do. If you look at it from these kind of young people's perspective, it must feel a wee bit like the fox investigating the chicken coop. The kind of richer nations are the one that are responsible, but they're all seem to be the ones that offer these solutions. And that comment, I think, is very powerful. We're not victims, but a force to be reckoned with. I think it changes the tone of that debate, doesn't it? I mean, they're demanding justice rather than kind of being passive victims of what the kind of the resource rich or the rich nations of the north have done. It's an incredibly powerful statement to make. It's an incredibly powerful movement to build, I think. I hope that they find a voice. Is it Omar El Mawi from Kenya? And he says, all we have to do is put our small differences aside and find unity of purpose to stop this exploitation of global resources. And that kind of, to me, hits the nugget of the whole issue. Really is we really have to kind of completely rethink about how we're doing. The problem, I think, with the kind of the rich West is the arrogance. It's that many nations come from an empired past, and there is that arrogance in the sense of we can't learn. We know best. We can't learn from other what or other, as they would see, lesser nations. But what you've got is we have destroyed, those nations. Those nations are the ones that are suffering the most from global warming and all that comes with it. We talked about that the COP26, wasn't it? That level
Hmm.
of destruction that's occurring. These people, yes, they should be demanding reparation. They should be demanding justice. And the only way that we could kind of begin to address that and address global warming in that is to recognise that and to recognise our role, not as individuals, but as nations and international kind of, rich nations. We address those issues and own up to what we've done as kind of international global exploitation of resources, and
Hmm.
start building something much newer. It sounds maybe a bit vague and woolly, but we have to start somewhere. We have to begin to take the voices of those that are actually suffering that seriously, and give them a voice and listen to what they're saying. Because who else knows the consequences of global warming other than the countries that are being absolutely affected by it? We've had a little taste of it. Remember the storms that we had that kind of blew the roof off along the
Hmm.
road from me and various like kind of other trees. We've got a taste of it, but not to the degree, not anywhere near to the degree of other countries. And we really need to be mindful of that. It's a great international movement. And you know what? We go the young people, because we've known this for a long time. It's the young people that have to carry the burden of our errors from the
That's a
past,
good point.
centuries of errors, and it looks like it's going to be them that's going to kind of stand up and demand it be fixed as well. So, good on them.
That's a good message, exactly, Siobhan. Thank you. Now then, back in Scotland, campaigners have joined almost 50 MPs in calling for the UK government to support the miscarriage leave bill. Introduced by SNP MP Angela Crawley, the miscarriage leave bill would introduce a statutory right for parents to a minimum of 3 days paid leave in the event of a miscarriage, ectopic pregnancy, or molar pregnancy. Ahead of the bill's second reading, the Lanark and Hamilton East MP has written to new Prime Minister Liz Truss and new Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Jacob Rees-Mogg, urging them to support it. The letters have been signed by 48 MPs from across the House of Commons, as well as the Miscarriage Association, Mumsnet, Miscarriage Support, the Ectopic Pregnancy Trust, Tommy's, SANS, Simba, and the campaigner Keely Langthorne. Up to 1 in 4 pregnancies will end in miscarriage, but there is currently no provision in place to support grieving parents through their loss before 24 weeks of pregnancy. Countries, including Australia and New Zealand, have already introduced paid miscarriage leave, and Northern Ireland is set to do so before 2026. The Scottish Government already offers 3 days paid leave for parents in the public sector who suffer miscarriage. But because the matter is devolved to Westminster, it can't be imposed on the private sector without UK government legislation. So, Siobhan, will this bill be able to make it onto the Westminster statute books at a time when the ERG and the right wing of the Tories and Jacob Rees-Mogg say that they want to reduce regulations in the workplace?
There's your tension, isn't it? There's your tension right there. I think between a humane employment strategy and an employment strategy that sees its workforce as nothing more than cogs in a right wing economic machine. And I do think that these issues are kind of beginning to clash quite forcefully now. I mean, we know that this is what Brexit was all about. It was all about deregulation, not being tied by pesky rules and regulation and health and safety and things. A drive to the bottom. You remember Liz Truss in one of her speeches just blew my mind when she said it. We shouldn't. What was it? We shouldn't be restricted by those kind of regulations for food. And I thought, oh Lord above, that's what we're talking about. Basically, just anything and any quality, anything goes. all in the drive for profit. And this is where the kind of the economics has, well, the right wing economics is almost reaching the end of its life, isn't it? The neoliberal economics that came in the 80s and kind of dominated for the next 30, 40, 50 years. It's almost reaching its end point, because when you've got kind of those kind of clashes between, well, let's look at the workforce as people. Let's look at them as women as well. And there's a real gendered argument here too.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think that, it's because it's a women's burden, or seen as a women's burden, that's probably we've never thought about it. I can't believe that we've not thought about it. It seems bizarre to me
Mm.
now when you think about it, that we don't have that. Why would we not? But yeah, you're right. There is that real clash now. Um, let's see what they do. It's yet again Scottish government taking the lead, with the other countries like New Zealand and Australia, and having that kind of humane approach to families' pain. And that's really is what it is. But what, 3 more days? I mean, think about this from a kind of a Jacob Rees-Mogg, right wing
Hmm.
economic perspective. Yeah, it's like 3 more days. What, just for a miscarriage? You know, that's what it's going to be, isn't it? It's like, but
Yep.
what about our bottom profit line? What about the
Yep.
tax cuts that we're going to get? So there really is. I mean, it sounds a bit flippant, but I mean, that's really what you're talking about. It's a clash of just fundamentally different ideas on how we look at our workforce.
Absolutely. Thank you, Siobhan. Now, we'll move to Iran now, because Iranian students have stepped up their protests in defiance of a crackdown by security forces who allegedly cornered and shot 12 students at a prestigious university in Tehran on Sunday night. Anti-government protests, ignited by the death of a young woman in police custody in mid-September, have spread around the country at various levels of intensity, revealing a cultural chasm between the country's educated youth and an elderly male religious establishment. In his first remarks on the protests, the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, gave strong backing to security forces and accused the United States and Israel, the Islamic Republic's arch adversaries, of orchestrating the disturbances. If there had been no issue of the young woman's death, they would have used another pretext to stir up unrest and riots at this time, Khamenei said. Concern has grown over the latest violence at Tehran's prestigious Sharif University of Technology, where, local media reported, riot police confronted hundreds of students, with officers using tear gas and paintball guns and carrying non-lethal steel pellet guns. Many students were arrested and taken away in police cars or ambulances as parents and others came to rescue them. The Scottish actor and screenwriter Mariam Hamidi posted on Twitter saying that she had been quiet on social media as she was fearful for her family in Iran, but now her bigger fear is doing nothing when young women in Iran are risking their lives. In a passionate thread, Miss Hamidi said that these aren't protests, but the flashpoint of a revolution where people are dying and disappearing on the streets. She said that this is, of course, a feminist revolution, as widely reported, but repression of women has been used as a tool to control the entire population of Iran for 43 years. Ms. Hamidi finished her thread by calling on people to reach out to Iranian, Afghani, and Kurdish friends who may be grieving, worried about family at risk, and overwhelmed. She said, "This is a scary time for lots of us in the UK, but let's support one another." So, Siobhan, we were talking a few minutes ago about activism by young people in the context of the climate crisis. Are the protests in Iran, which are about freedoms, are they an indication that young people feel that they have to do something to effect change for the better?
Yeah, it's looking like it, isn't it? Just going to say that my friend's family is it lives in Tehran, and so that's that makes it kind of quite personal actually, for myself as well. Just kind of thinking about how they're getting on. But yes, I mean. It's an interesting one, the hijab, isn't it? It's all kind of it's been centered on that and the morality police and that young woman that was arrested and murdered. It was because she was wearing the hijab wrong. As they say, the fashion has been, this is kind of, as my friend was telling me, the fashion has been, in Tehran especially, because it's relatively more modern, is that the hijab, as the Guardian was saying, it's kind of further and further back, showing more and more hair. And that seems to have been a kind of gradual thing as things have gone, especially students actually as well. And that seems to be kind of one of those things. But it's almost this sense of a clampdown. I was looking up the penalty for not wearing a hijab, and it's you could be imprisoned from 10 days to 2 months and fined as well. So it's, I mean, it's quite, I mean, it's not like a driving, it's not like a speeding fine or something like that. I mean, there's real consequences to not wearing the hijab there. So it really is, it's quite repressive in that respect. So yes, it's interesting that it's centered on that because it's very much the symbol of repression in Iran, because it is a kind of sign of kind of forcing women to be under the control of the Iranian regime, that dictation of what women should wear. So yes, so it's it shouldn't take the death of a woman. It shouldn't take the murder of a woman in prison for something as so simple as not deciding to choose what she wanted to wear or what she didn't want to wear. But it sounds like it's reached the women, or the young women have reached the end of their tether in this respect and are fighting back. White Wednesday
Yeah.
was something that's been building up as well. I think it was the third, oh God, was it the third Wednesday of the month where men and women would wear white in Iran, to
Mhm.
basically protest against the compulsory wearing of the hijab. So it's been a long burning issue, and it is a contentious issue as well. There
Yes.
was protests immediately after the introduction of the compulsory wearing of the hijab came in 1979.
Nine. Yeah.
So it's been a long running protest, and it just seems to have bubbled over.
It
Just
has.
one final point, because I think that the hijab itself is, it can symbolically as well as practically, it's very interesting in that you've got almost two cultures. One where women are forced to wear the hijab, but in other areas, if you look at the UK, if you look at France, if you look at some of the European countries, what you've got is almost a forced removal of the hijab. Do you
Mm.
remember that
Mm.
scene in the
Yep.
French beach just a few years ago, where the woman was forced by gunpoint from the police to remove her kind of the swimming um, costume that covers her body? She was forced to remove that. So we have this kind of real extremes of culture here for women. And the
Yes.
hijab seems
Yes.
to be very symbolic of that, is that you're either forced to wear it or you're forced not to wear it because you're seen to, you know, be a terrorist. It comes with all those connotations now. And so it's an interesting one. It's so simple. Something so simple as the right to choose what you wear is
Yes.
under threat, not just in Iran but across the board as well. And to fight back from that is an incredibly powerful thing. I
It is.
hope that it initiates another revolution in Iran, and something that's maybe just a bit more liberal.
Change for people's rights. Absolutely. Thank you,
Yeah.
Siobhan. Now, in the United States, Sachin Littlefeather, the Native American activist who famously declined Marlon Brando's Oscar for The Godfather, has died aged 75. The Academy of Motion Pictures announced yesterday. Ms. Littlefeather had been suffering from breast cancer. The Academy announced her death in a tweet last night. The Hollywood Reporter cited a statement from her caretaker that said that she had died at noon on Sunday at her home in the Northern Californian city of Novato, surrounded by her loved ones. Marlon Brando won the Best Actor Oscar in 1973 for his role in The Godfather, but did not attend the ceremony, protesting in support of Native American rights. Sachin Littlefeather appeared at the event on Brando's behalf. She declined to accept the award and gave a short speech explaining the actor's refusal was due, in part, to the treatment of American Indians today by the film industry and on television in movie reruns. In August, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences issued a formal apology to Miss Littlefeather over her treatment. Their statement of reconciliation said that her appearance described her appearance as a powerful statement that continues to remind us of the necessity of respect and the importance of human dignity. The abuse you endured was unwarranted and unjustified. The emotional burden you have lived through, and the cost to your own career in our industry are irreparable. For too long, the courage that you showed has been unacknowledged. For this, we offer both our deepest apologies and our sincere admiration. Ms. Littlefeather responded to the apology, saying, "Regarding the Academy's apology to me, we Indians are very patient people. It's only been 50 years. We need to keep our sense of humour about this at all times. It's our method of survival." She also said she promised Brando that she would not touch the statuette. "I went up there like a warrior woman. I went up there with the grace and the beauty and the courage and the humility of my people. I spoke from my heart." Siobhan, that sounds exactly like a warrior woman to me.
Yeah, yeah. To my shame, and I hadn't heard about her until the Academy Awards had offered that apology, and I was speaking to my dad about it, and he was like, "Oh my God, have you never heard it?" And I always wondered how my dad was a big fan of Marlon Brando, and it was exactly that. It was exactly that. Actually, it was that that reason that my dad kind of thought that Marlon Brando was great. It was. I mean, these days political speeches and these awards are quite common, but it wasn't back then. And if you look at that, it was an incredibly powerful moment. And like you say, she literally kind of ushered the award away, and I will not touch it, in complete disdain as well. The response that she got was quite terrible, actually. I think there was threatened, and I was trying to think of the name of the actor who threatened her
John Wayne.
backstage. John Wayne, yeah,
John
John
Wayne.
Wayne. It was John Wayne that threatened her afterwards, just for something so simple as to actually say, "Look, we are oppressed. Let's talk about Wounded Knee here. Let's talk about these elements, because actually, what it does is it strikes at the very, very heart of American society and how American society was built. Myself and I was I was explaining to my son just the other day. We were talking about empire, and myself and my friend from Louisiana. We will often have these chats about how the UK and the US are very similar in that they haven't come to terms with their empire past and the violence that it begets. And I think that speech there, really at the Academy, was really touched the nerve. Hence the fact that it was so extreme in its response, and hence the fact it took 50 years to offer an apology. But she's right, better late than never. She was a genuine warrior. There's a massive recurring theme here tonight, and it's about
Hmm.
young women making a stand. And
Absolutely.
this woman was, one of the early examples of that. She was an amazing figure. I was fascinated when I was reading about her, and that took great strength. You see her there; she held her nerve in this very calm, very polite way, and she held that against quite a lot of kind of quite vicious resistance, actually. And
Absolutely.
good on Marlon Brando for allowing that space.
Yes.
Because had it not been for him using that award, that the plight of the Native American Indians and what would probably never have come to the fore in the way that it had. So, respect to him as well. But yeah, go the women.
Absolutely, Siobhan, completely. Now then, we'll move now to our final item this evening, because tickets for the Scottish premiere of Doctor Who: Worlds of Wonder at the National Museum of Scotland go on sale tomorrow, the 4th of October. This groundbreaking new exhibition, which runs from the 9th of December until the 1st of May next year, will explore the science behind the global hit television series Doctor Who, and will give fans a chance to experience the Doctor's adventures from a scientific perspective. To celebrate tickets going on sale, the TARDIS materialised in the Grand Gallery of the National Museum this morning. The TARDIS is just one of a number of real props from the series that will feature in the exhibition. Visitors to the exhibition will also come face to face with the Doctor's most famous foes in the Monster Vault, including Cybermen, Weeping Angels, and Daleks. This exhibition invites fans of all ages to explore the role science has played in the world's longest-running action-adventure show. The 8 zones set within this educational exhibition cover a diverse selection of exciting scientific topics, while drawing in content from across the full canon of Doctor Who. So, Siobhan, Siobhan, I know that you're a fan. Scotland has a strong association with the show. Sylvester McCoy, David Tennant, and Peter Capaldi have all played the Doctor, and a fourth
Yeah.
Scot, Ncuti Gatwa, was recently announced as the next new Doctor. Stephen
Yes,
Moffat, who was the showrunner for several years, is from Paisley, and other Scottish cast members in recent years have included Karen Gillan, Niamh McIntosh, Michelle Gomez, and Alan Cumming. So, do you think is there a Celtic sensibility in the show with so many of Scots involved in production, and also the show being made in Cardiff?
Oh, yeah, maybe I've never seen the Scottish element of that before, but yeah, you're right. Actually, there's quite a kind of a strong kind of Celtic connection there. Maybe it's just this constant reimagining that Scots kind of tap into, that we tend to do. I'm gonna have a slight confession, because I was cutting it a bit fine coming into this meeting, and coming into this, and I said, "Oh no, I had a meeting. I was actually trying to get a ticket." So it was an actually trying to get a ticket for
Excellent.
your
Well, I hope you're able to get tickets and to come to Chamber Street in Edinburgh to see this exhibition. As I say, it opens at the beginning of December, on the 9th of December. So I hope you manage to come along and see it. One other wee Scottish connection: the Doctor actually is a medical doctor and Scottish qualified too. In a sick bay in the 1967 script for a story called The Moon Base, he was asked, "Listen, are you really a medical doctor?" And he replied, saying, "Yes, I think I was once, Polly. I think I took a degree once in Glasgow, 1888. I think, Lister." But that's all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to continue to develop the station, and to make new programmes for you. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you. Thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland behind the scenes, in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you can also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Meantime, we will be here again tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us again then. And that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching this evening, and I'd like to give very special thanks to our very special guest and Doctor Who fanatic, Siobhan Tolland. Thanks, Siobhan.
Right.
On this day in 1706, the Scottish Parliament began its debate on the Treaty of Union between Scotland and England. I think we all know how that worked out. Please have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.